Welcome back to the Stronger by Science Fireside Chat series. I'm your host, Greg Nuckols, joined today by my temporary guest host, Eric Trexler.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, and everyone that's listening that continues to email and message Greg begging for me to come back, go ahead and keep up the good work. It seems like he's really breaking down and giving in, which is fantastic.
Don't do that. Okay, let's get right into it with this episode. So these are, entirely us answering your questions or talking about subjects you would like us to talk about. And something that a few people asked about clearly indicates that you motherfuckers don't know us at all. Several people wanted to know what's in our wardrobe. What threads are we rocking these days? When we go out on the street, how do we turn heads? So Trex, what are you rocking these days?
Yeah, I have to admit, I know that it's vain, but I am a big time brand guy. I've got my clothing brands and I like to stay on brand with them. So I view it kind of like luxury cars. You know what I mean? You want to get the whole lineup, the SUV, the sports car, all from the same lineup. And for me, I'm a big time George guy, and I know you are too. But I'm gonna steal your thunder here a little bit. So a lot of people probably know George is the store brand for the, I guess you'd say, upscale Walmart clothing. So if you're getting your jeans, your dress pants, your dress shirts, your ties, your belts, your workout gear, I'm pretty much George head to toe. There are some minor...
Only because you can't access Fetzer Grays anymore, right?
That's true. Now you have to explain the concept of Fetzer Grays.
Yes. So the gym at UNC is called Fetzer Gymnasium. And if you didn't want to bring your own workout clothes, if you're going for a workout or going to play basketball, you could rent what everyone lovingly referred to as Fetzer Grays, which were t-shirts and like cotton gym shorts that I believe UNC purchased in approximately 1978. And that's what you wore all the time. And yeah. I'm going to tell on you right now, until pretty recently, Trex didn't own socks. He just checked out Fetzer Gray socks, and that's all he wore.
Okay, well, first of all, I made good on all that. All the Fetzer Grays, all the socks were returned to their rightful place. Maybe a time or two I would get a pair of socks behind, and I'd say, oh, there's an extra pair of socks here. I'll wear those today. But I made good, so you're not telling on anything. I'm a upstanding citizen. All that stuff got returned.
Just the concept of a functioning adult not owning socks.
I owned some, but the Fetzer Grays were really comfortable. They were nice, and they had the t-shirts were all like extra large, but really they fit like a double XL.
Oh yeah,
and I just felt like I was straight out of like a mid '90s bodybuilding training video.
Dude, I'm not gonna lie, those shirts were comfortable as hell.
They were, and it was like back in the day where everybody just wore those enormous t-shirts that just kind of hung off your body. And man, they were great. So yeah, the Fetzer Grays were a huge part of the rotation, along with the George brand from head to toe. Now there are some deviations from that. Things that are given to me, I will wear uncritically. Whatever article of clothing is given to me, I will wear, and I'll hang on to them for a while. So my current winter coat, you've seen the red one that I wear often. That was actually purchased for my brother when he was, I think, in 9th grade. So that would have put me right around the age of 12 when that was purchased. And what is that? 16 years later, it's still going strong. It's a high quality coat, and I'm never going to let it go, ever. So I do hand-me-downs big time. I do the George brand. Fetzer Grays are out of the rotation, unfortunately. Now, a lot of Christmas and birthday gifts going back to as long as I can remember. Luckily, my mother, she knows that I would not have clothing unless it was actually forced upon me and given to me. She also is really good at picking out clothes. So I think every single time I've ever been told, like, hey, you look nice today, I was wearing something that my mother purchased for me. So she's always right on the money with those purchases. But the problem there is I have a new policy. I hate accumulating things, like material objects of any kind. I consider them to be clutter. They drive me nuts. And so the new policy is no more buying clothing for me. And so basically my clothing lineup is set now. That door is shut. I have all the clothing I'm ever going to have. So that's the clothing side. Another thing some people know this about me, big time sneakerhead. So last year, I believe it was Payless Shoes had a liquidation sale. I think that was the name of the brand that went out of business, but basically everything in the store had to go. I showed up. I got as many shoes as a person could possibly carry out of a store. I don't think I'm ever going to wear shoes again, or purchase new shoes again. I got everything that would kind of fit around my size foot. I purchased and I got out of there. So based on that summary, you're probably wondering, Eric, being this in tune with style, how has that worked out for you over the years? And I have actually been the subject of not one, but two fashion interventions. When I first got to grad school, my colleagues, wonderful colleagues, they tried to, in a very subtle way, be like, hey, Eric, you should probably dress more like a person would, and maybe a little bit more professionally. And I just didn't get the subtle hints. And so eventually they had to be like, dude, what's happening? Wear some clothing that a person would typically wear out in public. Mm-hmm. So that was the first intervention. I'm not sure if it really stuck. I tried, but I kind of fell back into old habits. And then a guy that I coach powerlifting with, he was like 65, 70 at the time. He pulled me aside. I was asking him a bunch of statistics questions because he was a statistician by trade. And he was like, after this very long-winded question, he just pulled me aside. He's like, dude, forget about the stats. No one cares. What the hell are you wearing? You need to start wearing and so I think once someone above the age of 65 kind of pulls you aside and says, what the hell is going on? Where is your fashion sense? I think that's when you actually do kind of have a problem there. But anyway, that's kind of my approach to clothing. It's worked so far. I'm really happy with how I look every day, and I don't get positive comments, but surely I will eventually, I would think. And my advice to people, my final parting piece of advice here when it comes to clothing, collect as many t-shirts as you possibly can from random events, from random companies, random sport teams that you participated on. You can never have too many of those t-shirts. Sometimes you cut the sleeves off, but that is the final staple in my wardrobe, and that is pretty much my approach to style. Now, Greg, I know fashion's important to you as well, so why don't you tell us what you do for style?
Yeah, so I own 9 shirts, exactly 9, that I bought at Walmart for between $3 and $5 a piece about 3 or 4 years ago. And that's all I wear.
Yeah. Now, blue is a big fixture in that lineup.
Yeah, I mean, so red is my favorite color. When I was younger, I had a lot of red t-shirts. Walmart doesn't make that many red t-shirts, unfortunately. So a lot of blues, a lot of grays, a lot of greens. And by a lot of each, I mean like I have approximately 2 shirts of each of those colors. And yeah, that's all I wear on my upper body. And then I have 3 pairs of identical black athletic shorts that I cycle through. They are all at least 5 years old. I had one and only one jacket that I wore every day in the winter for about 5 years. It recently started, like the pocket started tearing off of it. It started getting holes in it, has a lot of stains, etc. So I found another identical version of the same jacket, and now I wear that all the time. When I went to grad school, I didn't want to have to think about what I wore, so I went to, you guessed it, Walmart, and bought 5 identical UNC shirts and 2 identical pairs of slacks, just so I could put on essentially my uniform every day. And yeah, that's my style. So one big upgrade I did make recently is I used to only wear like those $10 to $12 Walmart slip-on shoes. I recently upgraded to a pair of $25 Skechers. They were on sale, They're very comfortable. They seem like they're going to be more durable than the Walmart shoes. I am a little concerned that I may be experiencing lifestyle creep. So just, his business is going pretty well, making more money. I'm afraid that this increase in my shoe budget may just completely ruin our household finances.
Well, as a percent increase, it is a pretty dramatic change.
Oh yeah, I mean, I started recently spending 150% more on shoes, so that's that's something to keep in mind. But yeah, no, I consistently look like trash, and unlike you, who has had 2 interventions, I've had dozens of attempted interventions, and they just don't go anywhere. Because I'm very much like a comfort above all type person. It's like all of my shirts are 2 sizes too big. My athletic shorts are baggy and long. I just feel good,
Yeah.
And so yeah, I mean, I never leave the house anyways. So like, who cares?
Now, there was a moment when we were at an event in Coastal Carolina that we were both speaking at. It was like it was an event. So this was an event for the ISSN. A good friend of mine, Jason Kaliva, was running it. He's been on the podcast. And Greg and I were both supposed to speak, and Greg was speaking last. And I remember it was like 45 minutes before Greg's talk, and he's wearing the gym shorts and the t-shirt. And then it's like 30 minutes before the talk, and he's wearing the gym shorts and the t-shirt. And I was like, I know this isn't like the fanciest event of all time, but you are speaking at an academic event. And I was very concerned that you were actually going to go speak, and then finally, right at the last minute, you ended up stepping out of the room and changing, and I got to breathe that sigh of relief, because I was like, I think he's going to go for it.
This is a consistent theme, just with our friendship. You think that I am a much worse and much more socially unaware person than I actually am? Like,
it's true.
Like, so, dear listener, whenever we hang out with like some of Eric's friends, or like when he was dating before, if he brought a new girl over, he would like stress the importance to me of like not coming across as a complete piece of shit and like not making a bunch of off-color jokes. And it's just like, dude, Trex, you've known me for years at this point. We've gone through many of these situations together. I haven't done that. Like, that's not what I do. Like, I am not the same person with like people I don't know, or like in a formal situation, as I am when it's just like 2 dudes hanging out. But like, I think you think that I'm a complete piece of shit, honestly.
No, that's not true. But there have been times where I've brought you specific topics that are off limits. when I've brought somebody over, but like, you're not allowed to talk about these things. Mm-hmm. So there is some truth to that. But no, you know me, my personality is I like to plan for everything. And so I'll say, I trust that Greg isn't going to say this, but what would be better than trusting would be to officially make a statement about it. And let's set some policy in place for dinner this evening.
Yeah, but like, you don't say that to Lindsay.
No, well, Lindsay is a much better person than you in virtually all ways.
I mean, you're not wrong, but I don't think that there's like a magnitude of difference in like interpersonal awareness between the 2 of us.
No, so the problem is I get to hang out with you in more private settings and circumstances, so I know what you're capable of saying, and that makes me a little bit nervous sometimes.
Yeah, but I never say that stuff.
I know, but it's like one of those things where there could just be one erroneous, like the message just gets through your brain filter, and then it's a catastrophe. So I like to make sure that we are transparent about what's off limits at that particular engagement.
Fair enough.
Now, one thing I want to stress before we move on.
I mean, going back to the ISSN conference.
Yeah, go ahead.
It would have been fine.
It would have been fine.
So the thing about that conference is like, I don't know, seems like maybe 80% of the attendees, probably more, were students who were just going for, I don't know what, extra credit, like taking a class where they had to go to events or whatnot. I don't know. But there were a lot of butts in the seats and a lot of very young faces in the crowd early in the day. And I think that by the end of the day, they had been to enough to get the credit they needed to get.
It would appear so, yeah.
So this is not an exaggeration. I had the last talk of the day, theoretically the keynote. I mean, I'm not one for labels, but I'm going to call it a keynote. I got up to speak, and most of the speakers were gone. Jason was still there. You were still there. Like some of the other speakers and organizers were there, but in terms of attendees who weren't like formally associated with the event, there were 3 attendees left in the audience.
Is that a specific number?
It was 3, yeah.
Oh boy.
There were 8 people total, and 5 were either like Jason, other organizers, other speakers.
Yeah.
There were 3 attendees.
No fault of Jason's, by the way. We love Jason.
Oh no, absolutely not. But yeah, I could have got up there naked. Like it would have been. It would have had the exact same effect on a comparable number of people.
That's probably true. Okay. No, before we move on from clothing, like I was saying, I want to stress one thing. Now, we are often very sarcastic on the podcast. My concern is that someone's going to think that we're being some elitist, classist assholes with this. I cannot stress enough that this is exactly how both of us dress. We're not like joking around of like, oh yeah, I get my clothes at Walmart. We get our clothes at Walmart exclusively. And I want to make sure people don't think we're like, being smart asses about it.
No. I used to get more clothes at yard sales. I don't have as much time for yard saling anymore.
Yeah.
Also, I used to get... So, the thing about my current wardrobe is, like I said, I have exactly 9 shirts I bought at Walmart. And they've just held up really well. Like, they've made it a long time. Were I to restock my t-shirt collection, yard sales would be on the table, Goodwill would be on the table. The top price that I would ever be willing to spend for a t-shirt, I don't know, $7 maybe.
Actually, my girlfriend did recommend a topic that actually fits in perfectly here. The question was, aside from shoes, what do you think is the most expensive item of clothing you've ever bought? Like the dollar amount.
So I have owned some more expensive items of clothing, mostly stuff that like my parents bought for me when I was still in high school. So like I have some bow ties that were reasonably expensive.
Oh wow, I would not have guessed that.
Oh, like when I dress up, I wear a bow tie. That's my thing. And I have like a what's it called? An Under Armour hoodie for Harding University, which is where I did my undergrad. That was pretty pricey. But in terms of things I've purchased myself, okay, so this is kind of cheating, but I did get a specific bow tie for my wedding. Mm-hmm. But like that's a wedding garment.
Yeah,
so that's
it doesn't
not
really count.
That's not the same. I bought a pair of shoes. It was like $40 maybe, but you said no shoes.
I said no shoes. Yeah.
Man, I'm flailing around.
I mean, it couldn't be more than $30, right?
It's probably not more than 20.
Yeah, I wouldn't think so.
So I had some sport coats that I got at Goodwill. And sport coats at Goodwill are still $18.
Nice.
So I had like 3 $18 sport coats, and I think that is the most expensive non-shoe article of clothing I've ever bought.
My parting comment is that I actually think you need an intervention more than I did.
Oh, I'm sure I do. But I have enough like decent articles of clothing from my youth that when I go out in public, I can still look presentable. It's just like, for kicking around the house, I just want to be comfortable.
I hear you, man. All right, so...
What's the most expensive article of clothing you've ever bought?
I did finally, within the last couple of years, I got a nice winter coat that's not like a ski kind of coat. If I go skiing, I'm wearing the one from when I was 12. You've seen it.
No. So I completely whiffed on something. Mm-hmm. I did get a nice coat and some thermal pants for Iceland.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. That's important. But yeah, I got a nice coat. I got it at Old Navy on a Black Friday sale. I think it was $50, and I think that anchors the high end of my clothing scale for sure. But my average price per garment couldn't be more than $11. I just don't see how it'd be possible.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, so that's clothing advice from us, and much like our relationship advice, probably wouldn't utilize it.
Well, so here's one thing I'll say, and I think that I'm probably fortunate in that I can do this, but part of how I present myself in day-to-day life is intentional, because like, if there is something that does really grind my gears, it's people who are just like super elitist. And like, yeah. So I want to see how people will treat me when they meet me, if they, if they're going to make negative assumptions about me based on how I look.
Yeah.
If I'm presenting myself how I typically do and someone's still pretty cool, then I'm like, okay, you've passed the first test. We could potentially be friends. But yeah, it is partly strategic.
Mm-hmm.
I do know how to dress well and present myself well. And I do have some nicer stuff in my closet that I just literally never wear. But yeah, I mean, I want to see how people will treat me if I don't put in the effort to present myself well.
Yeah, you don't want people to treat you differently or take you more seriously just because you're like super buttoned up and dressed super well, basically.
Correct, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. For me, I just have no interest in clothing whatsoever. Mm-hmm. Like, I'm not doing it intentionally. I'm just like, well, I could get a shirt for $31 or for $8. I'm going to get the $8.
Yeah.
Almost always.
That makes sense.
All right. So yeah, like I said, that is Stronger by Science clothing advice. Not sure if I would necessarily take much of it, but it's there. It exists. And now you've heard it.
That is true.
Now, someone asked us about defining moments of our lives. And that's a very interesting prompt to talk about, because I know for me, there's one very specific that I have in mind.
Mm-hmm.
And it's quite an interesting story that really is relevant to like what I do with Stronger by Science. So I remember very specifically one day, I know I've told this story on some podcasts, but I don't think it's ours. You and I both talk into microphones countless hours per month. Like, I don't know where it went, but it's somewhere out there.
Yeah.
But I was walking home from the gym and I was in full dreamer bulk mode. We've talked about that on the podcast. I weighed 20 pounds more than I had any business weighing at the time, but I was fully bulked up and just like a rock, just a big mass. And I was walking home from the gym thinking about how my workout went, and kind of just walked right in front of a car. Like, I thought that it was a one-way street, but it was actually a two-way street. And so that's a big mistake. You want to make sure you know where cars are coming from on the street.
You only looked in half as many directions as you should have.
Correct. Yeah. So I basically walked in front of this car that was driving. There was no traffic, so like it got me pretty good. It's not like it was like in stop and go traffic or anything. So anyway, I get nailed by this car. Totally my fault, but somehow, kind of walk away from it totally unscathed. Like, I still don't really get it, but the angle was right. Something about it was right. And the only thing that really hurt was I landed with my hand outstretched and I kind of bruised my palm. So like, I was lifting the next day. I just had to be careful about where the bar went. You know what I mean? And at that time, I was in that cycle that I try to talk young bodybuilders out of. And the same applies to powerlifters too, I would think. But a lot of times as a young bodybuilder, you want to do your first show, but you're like, you know what? I don't think my arms are big enough. And so you take 6-8 weeks, you focus on your arms. They're bigger now. And you go, okay, my arms are better, but now that I think about it, my legs are kind of small. And then you focus on your legs for a couple months and you say, before I get on stage, I better improve my chest a little bit. There's always something that you want to fix before you get on stage, because you feel like your physique is 25 years in the making. It's not just like, here's what I did this past year.
Yeah.
So I was in that cycle of thinking about competing and never pulling the trigger and just doing it. I got hit by the car and somehow didn't get hurt essentially at all. And at that point, I realized I need to do a bodybuilding show now. Otherwise, I'm going to get sick, or I'm going to get hurt, or I'm going to walk in front of another car. Like, I'm going to do something stupid that's going to prevent me from being able to actually do a prep and compete.
For the first time in your life, it gave you a sense of your own mortality.
I guess so, yeah. Or at least like, hey, I'm pretty lucky that I'm healthy enough to actually train right now. So I didn't feel like I could just delay this forever.
Yeah.
So I did a bodybuilding show, loved it. Was absolutely fascinated by the process. Bodybuilding got me into powerlifting. My interest in both of those things got me into really evaluating the evidence behind the fitness information I was consuming. At that time, I was an exercise science major, and I intended to become a physical therapist. But the interest in the evidence-based side of things and the research underlying the recommendations I had seen in so many different places, that got me interested in actually doing research within the field of exercise science and sport nutrition. So getting hit by that car, which again was just kind of a random occurrence, got me into bodybuilding, got me into powerlifting, got me into research, caused me to shift my graduate school plans and ultimately shift my entire career trajectory. So, honest to God, I don't know. If I didn't get hit by that car that day, I really don't know if I would be working in this field. I think most likely I would be working as a physical therapist, which is, of course, a fantastic profession, but it would have been a very different trajectory for me, I think. So whenever someone asks me of a big, pivotal, defining moment in my life, that is the only one that really sticks out as totally different from the rest.
No, I mean, that's a good vignette. And I also think it's good advice for people listening. Like, if you're casting about, you don't really know for sure what you want to do with your life, just like walk in traffic for a little bit. It's really good for giving you that sense of clarity.
I thought you were going to be serious. You snuck up on me there. I thought you were going to actually give good advice. But no, I would imagine there are probably some powerlifters out there who are thinking, I'd kind of like to compete to see what it's all about, but I don't want to compete until I have a insert total number or until I'm benching blank. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Wanting to hit a threshold before you get into it. And I think in some cases it makes sense to say, let's go ahead and dive in and see what we can do. You know? That doesn't mean everyone should compete immediately, but there are instances where you've kicked that can down the road a little bit too long, and it's time to dive in. Mm-hmm. What about you? Do you have any major defining moments?
So kind of. Not quite as dramatic as getting hit by a car, but I also had something that on its face was not such a good thing happen to me that ended up putting me on the path I'm currently on, which thus far seems to be a pretty good path. So I was big into sports growing up, played football, basketball, baseball, soccer, played the last three going into high school. After freshman year of high school, I was already into lifting, but lifting primarily for football and basketball, more so basketball than football. Went to football camp that summer, and it was kind of like the reverse of your case, because I was the metaphorical car in this situation. But so I was a defensive lineman and tight end / slot receiver, and we were doing pursuit drills, and I was the only person on the defensive line who was also a skill player on offense. And so I was the designated ball carrier to like help all of these other defensive linemen learn about pursuit angles. And I was a sophomore who was probably going to play on varsity that upcoming year. So it was all of the varsity defensive linemen, and we had some big old boys on the team. And most of them just took like dog shit pursuit angles. So I didn't take that much physical abuse, either like make it look like I'm going to cut inside and just beat them up the sideline, or cut back in. And it was all fine. But then this one guy who his nickname was Meat, and that will give you some idea of what his physical complexion was. Meat unfortunately took a very good pursuit angle. And so I had really no choice but to try to run him over. And so keep in mind, at this moment in my life, I'm probably like 155, 160. Like, I was on the defensive line through sheer grit and meanness. like I didn't belong there. I was a much more like prototypical slot receiver. So Meat had about 120 pounds on me, but I was like, well, whatever, like gotta do what I gotta do. So like I just lowered my head. This is before we knew that concussions were a thing that happened and were bad. So I just lowered my head and put it right in Meat's face mask and ran him straight over. And I was like, oh, he didn't wrap me up. This is going fine. And that was like my last thought. And then I woke up in a puddle of my own vomit.
Yeah.
So I gave myself a pretty bad concussion. And it actually turned out to be a really, really bad concussion. I had to go to the hospital. The person who like took the x-ray basically said that if I had another concussion of a similar magnitude, like I could potentially like wind up in a vegetative state or have very severe brain damage. And so, they said, hey, don't do sports with a contact element for a while. So that obviously knocked me out of football season. And they said at least 6 months. So that would have taken through like week 4 of basketball season. So I couldn't try out for basketball either. Those were my 2 main sports. I was pretty tore up about that. And it just so happened that the guy who was coaching me for just like strength training to get better at basketball and football was Travis Mash, who nowadays most people know him as a weightlifting coach, but he was doing all powerlifting back then. He was an incredibly good powerlifter in his own right. He basically said like, hey, there's this sport called powerlifting where I think you'd be pretty good at it. Like you seem better at lifting weights than actual real sports anyways. And if you experience head trauma, it's because you did something very, very wrong. It's, ideally not a sport that you experience head trauma doing. And so that got me into powerlifting. And that's really what put me down the road that I'm currently on. So another like very unfortunate thing, you getting hit by a car, me hitting another person too hard and scrambling my brain.
Yeah, I was hoping that Meat was like when there's like a huge person and they call him Tiny as his nickname, but it sounds like this one was right on the nose.
Yeah. His name was Demetrius, and so Meat was just short for that, but it was also very fitting.
Yeah.
But yeah, so that's what initially kind of like put me down the road I'm currently on. So yeah, that's probably the defining moment in my life up to this point.
Yeah. So you got your concussion, and after the concussion, you got into powerlifting, which is smart. That's a good plan. I also, as you know, had concussion issues when I was I wrestled and played football as a high school athlete, and for some reason, I don't think my thinking was very clear at the time, but when I first was really sidelined with concussions, they kind of let me come back to finish my wrestling career, but it was kind of iffy. Like, I think if it happened today, they would not have allowed me to. Mm-hmm. But after I finished my career kind of barely coming back from a concussion, I was like, okay, what do I do now? And what I wanted to do was get, like every high school wrestler, I wanted to get into mixed martial arts. And the thing about mixed martial arts is the head trauma is kind of baked into the cake.
Yeah.
Even if you're good at it, you're getting some head trauma, eventually. And for some reason, I didn't really think that was an important factor. I was like, I'm sure I'll be slick. I won't catch one right on the chin. I'll just do this forever and never get hit. And that was a bad plan. So I had a coach that was like one of my wrestling coaches who was also getting into mixed martial arts. Obviously, he had been into it for like a year or two. Mm-hmm. But he had all the sparring gear, and he was like, "Oh, you want to try this out? Let's give it a shot." And we were just kind of messing around, doing some boxing stuff. And he was a much larger person than me and more experienced. And we tried to kind of, it's kind of like with wrestling, we would do like jujitsu stuff every now and then, and just like, if you're gonna feel anything that doesn't feel right, just tap out. We'll be good. We could control it. Mm-hmm. And man, one time he threw a punch that just couldn't be controlled. And God, he caught me just square on the jaw. And
Oh, jeez.
it was literally a single instant in which, all my neurons kind of aligned, and they said, I don't think we should be doing this.
Mm-hmm.
And that was actually the the beginning and the end of my mixed martial arts career. So if you have concussion issues that disrupt your wrestling career, my advice would be not to transition to mixed martial arts, because you're probably going to get punched and or kicked or kneed in the face.
Yeah, just stick with playing in traffic.
Exactly. So what I did after that, actually, that's when I started lifting just to get as huge as possible. I didn't know I would end up doing bodybuilding from it, but that's when I was like, okay, no more wrestling, no more getting punched in the face. I'm just going to lift heavy stuff as much as I can, eat an obscene amount of protein because I didn't know anything about research at that time, and do my best with that. So that was when I knew you were smart to go powerlifting right out of the gate. Mixed martial arts was not for me.
Well, I mean, yeah. So I have had one more like head trauma / sport related scare since then. So after I got knocked out of real sports at a very competitive level, I couldn't stay away. So, I went from playing like high school basketball to like whatever. I'll still play rec league basketball, and I kept playing rec league baseball as well. And one time, so I was playing third base, and this kid squared around to bunt. And so I come charging down the line to cover the bunt. And at the last second, he pulls the bat back, swings, line drive. I'm like, how long is the base path? 90 feet?
Should be 90 feet, yeah.
So I was, I don't know, maybe 35 feet away at that point. Like, I mean, he showed bunt early. Like, I was ready for it. Hit a line drive, smacked me right in the face. Like, I still have a scar over my nose from it. Like, the laces on the ball opened my nose right up.
Yeah.
Just snapped that bone. I think that like severed it, like a nasal artery. So I was just like, I looked like a rhinoceros. Like, blood was just spurting up out of my face.
Oh.
And if that ball would have been 3 inches higher and caught me in the forehead, like that may have been that second big concussion that I'd been trying to avoid. So funny story about that. That was a Sunday like afternoon into Sunday evening baseball game. And so my family always went to church both Sunday morning and Sunday evening. My parents had left the game maybe 10 minutes before that happened. And I don't remember if anyone in the family had cell phones yet, or like maybe just their phones were turned off, but I had no way to get in touch with them. And I was losing enough blood that someone called an ambulance because there was quite a large pool of blood just on the baseball field. And I realized this is supposed to be like fun, lighthearted Fireside Chat content.
Yeah, you're not very good at this.
I promise that I'm going to get to something kind of amusing, yet possibly in a morbid way by the end of it. So I'm like on there, like I'm on the field on my hands and knees, just gushing blood from my face. The ambulance shows up and they basically said like, hey, they took my blood pressure and it was like super low. So they're like, you've lost a lot of blood. You should probably come to the hospital. And like my dad, when I was really young, had super, super good medical insurance. And in hindsight, like knowing what I know now about the health insurance marketplace in the US, at that time, he still had very good health insurance. It just wasn't like as crazy good as it had been previously. Yeah. But like my parents complained about their health insurance. And so I was just like, oh shit, I don't know how much it's going to cost my family if I go to the hospital.
Yeah.
And so I said like, nah, like I'm not getting in that fucking ambulance. Like you're not going to bankrupt my family. And so I shooed them away. The field was completely unusable at this point. Like they had to call the rest of the game because
my God.
Yeah. Just to contextualize it. So I at the end of the story, I did end up eventually going to the hospital, and my blood pressure was like, man, I don't want to lie to you, but it was somewhere in the neighborhood of like 90/52. And so I forget the exact number that they put on it, but like they estimated that I'd lost approximately a shit ton of blood. So the field wasn't usable at this point. The game was called. And so, like one of my buddies on my team, like I asked his parents, like, hey, my parents are at church. Like that's probably where I should go. Would you mind dropping me at church? And so they said, they looked me up and down, and they were like, we'll need to put out a towel on the car seat for you.
Right.
But sure, we can drive you to church. And so I'm covered in blood, just head to toe at this point. Like the whole front of my shirt caked in blood, like blood running down my baseball pants. There's a lot of blood in this situation. And so my parents were in church, and I got dropped off. I'm like super lightheaded by this point, but I'm thinking clearly enough to know that I shouldn't walk into the front of the auditorium, because that might disrupt people. So I decided like, I'll walk in through the back of the auditorium, and get my parents and we can decide what to do from here. And so I walk in the back of the auditorium, and our preacher, Claude, he's just the chillest old dude ever. Like nothing would rile him up, completely unflappable. And I walk in the back of the auditorium. I'm trying to make as little noise as possible because like I don't want to draw attention to myself, but I look like, someone from a war movie.
Right.
And Claude just freezes. Mouth drops open like from a cartoon, like just mouth agape. And he was like, "Young man, are you okay?"
Yeah.
And then I'm trying not to draw attention to myself, but every goddamn person in the auditorium turns around and like stares at me. And I'm like, well, shit, I feel incredibly out of place now. My plan completely backfired. Thanks, Claude.
Oh, man.
And so like I get my parents, and I was like, can we go to the hospital? And they're like, yes, we can go to the hospital. So anyway, went to the hospital. They set my nose. They set it kind of crooked. I broke it again a few years later and like set it straighter myself, which was good. Put a ton of blood in me, and then I felt fine. Had a killer headache for like a week and a half. But yeah, that's that story.
But the important thing is it wasn't a catastrophic final concussion to end all concussions for you.
Correct.
You lived to fight another day.
I did.
And I would say your brain still functions approximately decently.
Really as well as one could hope it to at this point.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so there you go. A little bit of injury, a little bit of concussion, a little bit of getting hit by cars. Those are some defining moments in our lives. Now, Greg, you on the show have built up a reputation as being a bit of a culinary expert. I get to enjoy your cooking firsthand. You've made a lot of very passable dishes in weeks past. So we've gotten a lot of random food questions, and I was thinking the easiest way to do this is I just kind of run them by you. I feel comfortable deferring to you on this. You know a lot more about food than I do.
No, I think it should be a discussion because now, so just so you guys are aware of how this is going to go, we're not really talking about the science or application of cooking and food in this segment. We're more talking about the philosophy of food.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. So let's dive in and we'll have a discussion. Let's see if we can reach some common ground on some of these topics.
All right.
And just a warning, some of these are very controversial. So I know we're going to get a lot of hate mail, but we're going to dive in. Number one, is a hot dog a sandwich, a taco, or neither?
So in my opinion, I would say a hot dog is a taco.
Okay.
What do you think?
So I thought about this, and I actually it kind of blew my mind. I started to think about what are some of the defining characteristics of a hot dog itself before I put it into the sandwich or the taco category. And so I would answer this question with another question. Is a submarine sandwich, is that a hot dog? If you think of the shape of the sub bread, you might be looking at a hot dog there.
Well, so I think the first question you need to ask yourself is what is the defining characteristic of a hot dog? Mm-hmm. Is it the Frankfurter sausage itself? Because then the question becomes, well, when is it no longer a Frankfurter sausage and thus not a hot dog? So let's imagine a thought experiment. So you have just a standard beef frank on one side, and then you have a kielbasa on the other side.
Okay.
And there is clearly a continuum between the two. So they use different meats, they have different fat contents, different nitrate contents, different like spices and seasoning used. But one could slowly tweak the formula and make a hot dog more kielbasa-like until it was, definitely no longer a Frankfurter.
Right.
But where can you draw that line? And can you draw that line? I would argue maybe no. So then you open yourself up to a world where virtually any sausage on that shape bun is then a hot dog. And then if you removed the casing, is it now a fundamentally different thing?
Yeah, I mean, what about a hot dog without a bun?
Right, yeah.
You know what I mean?
Or so let's just say you have a hot dog with relatively a very large circumference for a hot dog.
Okay.
Okay. And then you cut it into slices and you put that on a hot dog bun.
Oh, okay.
That isn't that different from a sub.
No, that is a sub.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess it comes down to three different philosophical approaches to what a hot dog is. You could say that the hot dog is the meat product itself, which the bun has no bearing over that. You could say that it is the meat in bun concept, which then opens you up to the sub theory, which is a pretty controversial theory, I think.
It's compelling.
It's compelling, though. It's an evidence-based theory with some logic behind it. And then another approach is that a hot dog is basically just a lifestyle or a mindset. Like the hot dog is more of a conceptual entity than it is a specific food item. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I can see that.
So I don't really know where I'm of the opinion that a hot dog is a sandwich, but in reality, I would actually say that the sandwich is really a hot dog. I would actually kind of invert the scenario.
No, I think that is a very compelling perspective.
Yeah.
So let's move on to the next one.
Okay.
A very related concept.
Yeah.
Staying in the hot dog family. Is a corn dog a popsicle?
I would have to say yes. I would think that the fact that it is suspended on a stick puts it in the popsicle family, because I don't see any reason that you would have to necessarily define a popsicle as a cold treat. And this would also apply. Do you remember when they came out with those frozen food items, like at the grocery store, where it was like a breakfast sausage link on a stick wrapped in a pancake?
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I'm also considering that to be a popsicle as well, and that one even comes frozen. So that's right on the mark.
Well, most corn dogs do too.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what do you think?
It's tough to say. Because so part of the word is sickle, which sounds like icicle, or it could be indicative of like hammer and sickle. I don't know that much about the diet in Soviet Russia. It could have been very corn dog heavy. So I think, maybe we need to consider the etymology of the term, and neither of us are corn dog etymology experts. So we'll leave that up to you, dear listener.
This thought just came to me. I could have sworn I've told you this before. One time I was at a university event and someone was presenting their dissertation topic. Mm-hmm. And I believe they were in the Department of History, and their dissertation was on specifically the history of corn in Soviet Russia between 1945 and 1954. It was a specific 10-year period in which they evaluated the cultural significance of corn in the Soviet Union. So that actually might lend some evidence to your theory that it could be a different type of sickle altogether.
It could be, yeah. So if we grant that a corn dog might be a popsicle, and that the defining characteristic is just that it's skewered on a stick, then the question becomes, if you remove it from the stick, is it no longer a popsicle if it was cooked on the stick?
Yeah, it's not a popsicle anymore.
All right, fair enough.
Yeah, definitely not.
So strong verdict, corn dog, absolutely a popsicle.
Ooh, wait 1 second though.
Oh no.
What about a shish kebab?
See, so that's where I was going with this.
Uh oh.
So if one would grant that if you remove the corn dog from the stick, that it was still a popsicle, then one could say, well, what about, like teriyaki chicken on a stick that you might get from Chinese carryout? If you remove it, then maybe that's still a popsicle, and then maybe chickens themselves are popsicles.
No, it's got to be on the stick. It's got to be on the stick.
Okay, that makes sense.
All right. Now, we have a couple other very controversial ones that we want to get through here. We want to make sure people get their answers. This one is really good. Is a cereal a soup?
I would say so. So, the first thing that may come to mind is like, oh, but it's cold. Like, soup is generally served warm. I don't think anyone would contend that gazpacho is not a soup. Very famous cold soup. So if gazpacho can be a soup, then, one might say, well, you're dealing with milk rather than some standard soup broth. Well, they're a milk and cream based soup, so we can dismiss that out of hand. And then, one might say the cereal pieces. That's a non-standard soup thing, but a lot of them are grain and barley based. Like you can absolutely make like a delicious barley soup. The fact that it's been processed and, now takes the shape of an O and is marketed by a B, it's no longer the same thing. I would say it still is the same thing. So yeah, absolutely. Cereal's just a cold soup.
Yeah, this one with cereal and soup is one of the ones where like I'm actually struggling to think of a counterpoint. Like I think that's a very open and shut case. Cereal has to be a soup because otherwise, what is it?
Yeah, it's a soup.
Okay. Now we've got two that I'm going to save one for the end for obvious reasons.
Well, with this one, I want to introduce this one.
Okay, go ahead.
This isn't a question.
You're the host, so go ahead.
This is a declarative statement.
Okay.
A lasagna is a spaghetti-flavored cake.
From my limited knowledge of what cake is, that sounds correct to me.
Okay.
It's a layered cake.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it is absolutely a cake.
Yeah, and one might say, well, the noodles in a lasagna, like that's different from like standard cake,
Okay.
But oh dang it, what are they called? The little like round crepes. So I've gotten into making crepes recently. The texture of like a crepe and a more than al dente lasagna noodle, really not all that different. And there's a hot thing in kind of like the like not Etsy. What's the social media? Pinterest. Yeah. In like the Pinterest world these days.
I have a Pinterest t-shirt. That's part of my style repertoire.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, it was given to me.
Nice.
Obviously.
So like crepe cakes, which is essentially you make a crepe, you put a thin layer of frosting, you make another crepe, thin layer of frosting, and just stack them up until you have what people call a cake that's like 50 crepes stacked up with like thin layers of frosting in between them.
Wow.
And so, like, if crepes can be used to make a cake, I don't necessarily know that a lasagna noodle is all that different. And you have a slightly different, like, layer to filling ratio. But yeah, I think a lasagna is a spaghetti flavored cake.
Are there any other cakes that traditionally feature cottage cheese in them aside from lasagna?
You can use cottage cheese to make a cheesecake.
Nice.
So
yeah, then that works.
Yeah. So most Americans have probably either mostly had or exclusively had New York style cheesecakes, which are either only cream cheese or maybe cream cheese and ricotta.
Mm-hmm.
But really any creamy dairy product can be used to make a cheesecake. So I know in some other countries they use a product called quark, which is like somewhere, I think, between cottage cheese and ricotta. I know that people make like a macro-friendly dessert, which they term a cheesecake with cottage cheese. So yeah, that's not completely off limits.
Awesome. Now we have one additional question here. Do you want to dive in, or is this another one that you consider a definitive statement?
No, I would say this is a question.
Okay. So the question here is a Pop-Tart a ravioli?
I would say probably. So there is a difference in the the doughy, weedy product surrounding the filling. But I don't necessarily know that a ravioli has to be made with traditional pasta dough.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know, I don't know who the god of ravioli is who would make such a designation. So I'm not necessarily saying that a Pop-Tart is a ravioli, but I do think one could make that case. I think it's a question worth considering.
I'm very interested that you have such an open mind with these categorizations, because when I put cottage cheese into lasagna, you throw a fit, and all of a sudden you're saying that Pop-Tart is a ravioli. So where do you draw these arbitrary distinctions?
I wasn't upset about the fact that you put cottage cheese in the lasagna. Like
you waged a very public war on my lasagna.
No. So I did. The cottage cheese, like a traditional lasagna is made with a bechamel, like that's the creamy component. However, there are versions of lasagna that are made with cottage cheese. That's the type of lasagna that I ate growing up. Like, it had cottage cheese in it. It is a non-traditional ingredient, but it's been used long enough, especially in American cooking, that I'm not going to balk at that. It doesn't do as good of a job at what it's supposed to do as a nice bechamel does, but it does serve the same purpose.
Okay.
My problem was the lack of noodles.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that. That was the thing that really drove you nuts.
Yeah.
You just don't eat them. I mean, that's really all you have to say about it.
So I do think a defining characteristic of a lasagna is the fact that it has flat noodles in it.
Okay, well, we agree to disagree, and I'm comfortable with that, as long as you are.
Fair enough.
All right. Well, we're about an hour in, so do you want to, let people know to review us and where they can find us and all that stuff when we're coming back?
Yeah, so if you like the podcast, you can review us on iTunes or whatever platform you listen to the podcast on. If you're listening on YouTube, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Still feel like a complete piece of shit every time I say that. If you don't like the podcast, don't leave a fucking review.
We've gotten plenty of that feedback. We don't need any more of it.
Yeah, we know what is wrong with the show, and at this point it should be obvious we're never going to change anything. So your negative feedback, not only is it not welcome, it's not going to do anything. You're just wasting your own time. So good vibes only. Good vibes only in the review section. If you want to ask a question or suggest a topic for us to talk about, either in a regular episode or on a Fireside Chat, you can do so at tiny.cc/sbsqa. And that's about it. Hope you guys are having fun, staying safe, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks for listening to the Stronger by Science podcast. Now, Greg and I are not experts in medicine or health or really anything else for that matter, so before you make any changes to your diet and exercise habits, make sure you check with a doctor or another healthcare professional. If you enjoyed this podcast and you'd like to support it, visit strongerbyscience.com to check out the products and services that we offer. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.